Dave Talks Comics, Episode 103. Dave Talks Comics in 2015, Part 2. Welcome to Dave Talks Comics, the program where I talk about comic books I have read, cartoons I have watched, and comic book conventions to which I have gone. Most episodes are a mix of summary and opinion of what I have read or watched, and usually include spoilers. All past episodes can be streamed or downloaded from the program's website, davetalkscomics.com. On this episode, I will be talking about comic books I have read in 2015 but that I have not talked about on the show or only mentioned in passing. And I'll be talking about my process, the program's website, and some ideas I have for future episodes. There are quite a few comic books that I didn't devote a part of an episode to or a whole episode to that I wanted to at least mention in passing and maybe say a little bit about. The first is Krogan's Loyalty by Chris Schweitzer. I might have mentioned, I'm sure that I mentioned this on episode 78. I met Chris Schweitzer at HeroesCon this year. Krogan's Loyalty is the third book, I should say, in the Krogan series, Krogan's Adventure series, I believe it's called. And the other two are Krogan's Vengeance and Krogan's March. Is that what it is, Krogan's March? I think so. Let me look at the books on my shelf. I have them. Where are they? Yes, Krogan's Vengeance, Krogan's March, and Krogan's Loyalty. The first one is a pirate story. The second one is a French Foreign Legion story. And the third one is a story set during the American Revolution. And unlike the first two, the third one is about two brothers. But all of these characters are from the same family tree. And this one's all three of them are great. I wasn't sure he would be, the first one was great, and then I kept expecting him to drop the ball somewhere, or it not to live up to my memories of the previous books. And all three of them are great books, and they're good books probably for kids who are of reading age, maybe 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and on up. But certainly something like that would probably be the target audience. But the originals are in black and white, but I think that they're producing color versions of them soon. But check out episode 78 if you want to hear more on me talking about Chris Schweitzer and the Krogan series. The episode it's a HeroesCon episode. It's not all I talk about on that episode, but that's where you might be able to hear a little bit more of me talking about it. I finished off the Our Man comic book from the 1990s this year. I didn't talk about it at all on Dave Talks Comics in 2015. I had talked about it on a couple episodes in 2014, episodes 38 and episodes 51. This book was by Tom Peyer and Rags Morales. I liked the premise about an android who's from, I believe it was the 853rd century, who comes back to at that time, the 20th century, and joins the Justice League. He's got time-traveling powers, and it was kind of done almost, in some ways it was almost a humor book. They did some interesting things with it. They went back and delved into Our Man's past, because this isn't the original Our Man. This is the Our Man, the android Our Man, I think Our Man 3, the third Our Man. But they went back into the past of the original Our Man, and I think they revived one of his villains from back then. But ultimately, there was more misses than hits in this series for me. So I just didn't have the interest in recording any more episodes about it, other than the 2 that I did back in 2014. I've supported a few Kickstarters over the years. I'm a little gun shy these days about supporting them, but one that I thought was worth mentioning was Speculative Relationships. And this was a sci-fi romance type, a science fiction romance anthology book that I think it collected 5 or 6 different stories. What caught my eye about it was the fact that Daniel Warren Johnson did one of the stories in the collection. And so I supported it, and I read the whole thing. It's a fun read. The stories vary in quality as far as, the artwork, the type of artwork varies quite a bit. So if you're familiar with Daniel Warren Johnson's art, don't expect all of it to look like that. But I enjoyed it, I read it, and I hadn't talked about it yet, so I'm talking about it now. I did mention on an earlier episode, on episode 52, the Lou Fine Treasury. I think I mentioned it when I bought it. This was a collection with the artwork for all of these stories was by Lou Fine. It was a collection of Golden Age stories, and most of the stories were focused on characters who would later become part of the freedom fighters. The Ray, the Black Condor, Doll Man, and Uncle Sam were all featured in this book. These were all Golden Age stories. They were reprinted in black and white, even though they were originally printed in color. This collection is out of print, but for the time, Lou Fine's artwork is gorgeous. Compared to a lot of it's very fine line. Well, I don't know, very fine line, but very detailed. I mean, it's just beautiful. And when I think of Golden Age art, I don't think of stuff like this. But I wish it all looked like this, or looked something in a similar vein to what he did in comic books at that time. Another book that I really wish I had talked about on this show is Love and Rockets. I read Love and Rockets, Maggie the Mechanic by Jaime Hernandez this year. I might have talked about it a little bit on episode 73. I met Jaime Hernandez at the Appleseed Comic Con, and I got a sketch from him of Maggie, and he was very gracious. It was a little awkward, the conversation, but he also did there was also a spotlight panel on him, and I recorded that, and that is available on the website, the DaveTalksComics.com website. But it's a great story about, it's a mix of, you get a little bit of science fiction, and you get a lot of kind of relationship type stuff of people living both in the United States and also traveling overseas, and all these there's some aliens in it, and it's a very interesting book. I'm not sure how to describe it, but I think part of what makes it so interesting is the fact that it's a mix of the surreal and the real, that you get these characters who seem very real, but they're put in situations that sometimes the situations seem very real, and sometimes they seem a little wacko. And I haven't prepared anything, so I'm not sure how to back that up, other than to suggest that you read Maggie the Mechanic, which is the first collection of Jaime Hernandez's work on Love and Rockets. Another person who I met this is connected in a couple ways. Another person who I met at the Appleseed Comic Con is Travis Horseman. And he was the writer of a book that I had supported on Kickstarter. I didn't realize he was going to be at the Appleseed Comic Con, but I had gotten the book, the first volume, and I'd read it, and so I gave him some feedback on that. And that book is Amiculus Volume 1, Roma Eterna. And I probably also talked a little bit about this on episode 73. It's a story about the fall of Rome, which happened in 475 AD or 475 CE. It is about, it starts about, I think it's 50 or 75 years after the fall of Rome. And so the framing device is that there's people who have traveled to Rome who are trying to find, I believe from the Byzantine Empire, I think that's what it was called at that point. I'm not certain, or what became the Byzantine Empire. And have traveled to Rome to find out what happened, how the empire fell. And so this is a telling of the story. There was a Kickstarter for the first book, and there was also a Kickstarter for the second book, which has yet to be released, but hopefully it will be out within the next few months. And the book is written by Travis Horseman, and the artist is Giancarlo Caracuzzo. Another book that I picked up, another person who I met at Appleseed Comic-Con, whose book I picked up, was Dave Wachter. I had actually met him a few times before at other conventions in previous years. I had gotten him to do a commission for me of Enemy Ace, but I didn't realize that he was doing that he had a book out called Breath of Bones, which was written by Steve Niles and somebody else whose name escapes me at the moment. But it's set during World War II. It's about a golem. Well, it's about a young kid whose village is protected by a golem, and so it's the best part of the story is the artwork. Honestly, it's Dave Wachter's artwork. It's just the emotion, the feeling, the amount that he puts into these characters' faces, and the visual the expression that you can get from them, not just from what they say, but from the way they look. Their body language is just gorgeous, and it was just 3 issues. It was from Dark Horse, was the one who published this, and there's a beautiful hardback edition which I bought, which he did a sketch in it for me, and of the golem, and definitely I think it's worth reading. I think it's a great read if you can get your hands on it. Another book which I think I picked up at Appleseed Comic-Con, although I can't remember if it was this in 2015 or 2014, is Battlefield's Happy Valley. This is a part of a series by Garth Ennis. Garth Ennis writes all of these, but he has different artists that he's worked with. These are all set, I believe, during World War II, and this one is about a squadron of, well, I think it's about a squadron, but the focus on one particular pilot. There's a squadron of Australian pilots who were fighting out of England for the British, and it was only 3 issues long, so it's not a very thick collection. I think it's probably less than 100 pages, but it's an excellent story, and I really do like all of the Battlefield story that I've read. This is, I think, the 3rd or the 4th one that I've read, and Garth Ennis, I'm not a big fan of everything he does, but his war books, I think, are quite good. I also read Volume 7 of Scalped, which is subtitled Res Blues. I don't know why it's taking me so long to finish off this series. It's a great series. It's a great story. There's only, I believe, 10 collections, 10 volumes. I've read 7 of them now. I've only got 3 left. I should really be powering through the rest. Well, I don't know if powering through the rest of them is the best idea, but I should really make a commitment towards trying to finish these off in 2016. I always enjoy these. This one has some very interesting developments involving the Chief Red Crow's, actually, I'm not sure if it's Chief Red Crow, Lincoln Red Crow's right-hand man, Shunka. It's had some very interesting developments involving him. And you occasionally do get these spotlights on a particular character. The book is written by Jason Aaron, and most of the artwork is by R.M. Guerra, although there are a couple other fill-in artists, or maybe fill-in, well, yeah, I think fill-in is the right term in this case. I don't think that's a derogatory term. It's been I didn't talk about this at all on the podcast until now, and the last time I talked about Scalped was way back on episode 11 when I talked about volume 6. But if you haven't tried Scalped, and you like stories about crime stories and a story of somebody who's undercover, who's digging into, who's trying to expose. The main character is named Dashiell Badhorse, and he's an FBI agent who is going undercover back to the community that he comes from on this reservation in, I want to say it's North Dakota, but I'm not certain. Maybe it's South Dakota. Yeah, I'm thinking it's South Dakota, but I'm not certain once again. But it's basically about somebody who's gone underground or who's gone undercover to bust this guy and there's just all sorts of complications there. He has a substance abuse problem. There's all sorts of past relationship issues there, and there's much more than just his investigation or his attempts to get the information on Red Crow. It's a very good book, especially if you like crime stories, I'd say. Batman, Legends of the Dark Knight, issues 55 to 57. I read these. This story is called Watchtower. It's written by Chuck Dixon and Mike McMahon. I think I bought these issues at Baltimore Comic Con in 2014. I had high hopes for it because it was written by Chuck Dixon, but it didn't really go where I hoped it would. I think part of actually what attracted me to it was the artwork, not just the fact that Chuck Dixon wrote it. But it's an okay story. But I think as I'm starting to discover, I'm not as big a Batman fan as I once thought I was. And I say that because I'm going back and reading a lot of Batman stories. Not a lot. I'm reading a number of Batman stories. And some of them are okay, some of them are good, but I'm not loving them. And I'd say really with the exception of the 2 Frank Miller Batman stories, and I'm referring to, of course, Dark Knight Returns, the original Dark Knight Returns, and Batman Year One, I don't know if there's any Batman stories that I really love. There are some okay ones, and I do enjoy some of the things that are done in that were done in the Batman, the animated series, especially with the Joker and Harley Quinn and some of the other characters. Mr. Freeze, of course. And I enjoyed Batman Beyond. But the thing is, quite often I find that a good Batman story requires a villain with a good story. And I don't know, there are some... Well, another story that's Batman-related that I know I really enjoyed that I've never talked about on here is Robin Year One was another one that was... And I think that was also written by Chuck Dixon. Let me see. That should be up here on my shelf. Let's see. Robin Year One. Yes, that was written by Chuck Dixon. It's not, technically speaking, a Batman story. I mean, I really enjoyed Gotham Central. That's, technically speaking, not a Batman story, but both of them take place in Gotham and are part of the Gotham Batman world or Bat universe. But anyway, I did not really enjoy this Watchtower story that ran in Legends of the Dark Knight. I picked up at Heroes Con, I picked up The Demon, the 1987 miniseries by Matt Wagner. I was a little underwhelmed by this. I liked the artwork, but the story on the whole didn't really do it for me. Part of reading comic books, I'm not going to enjoy everything. And I don't remember exactly what it was about this that I didn't like. I mean, part of it, one thing I do remember, I thought they went a little overboard with the rhyming speak. I found, to the point where I found it distracting. And I felt like I really had to slow down to figure out, to read the words carefully and understand what the demon was saying. And it wasn't a bad story, it just wasn't one that I really liked. That's all. I mean, one book that I did like was Heart-Shaped Hole by Dean Haspiel. I picked this up at the Small Press Expo, which I talked about on episode 89, and it's got a very poetic feel to it. I may have talked about it a little bit on that episode, or possibly on one of the Baltimore Comic-Con episodes, because I then saw him again the next weekend at Baltimore Comic-Con, and I bought Beef with Tomato, which I have not read yet. But Heart-Shaped Hole is a very good story. It's about a character named Billy Dogma and his girlfriend Jane, I think it is. I'm not certain on that. But it's kind of R-rated, and it's not very long. It's basically an anthology, a collection of stories about Billy Dogma. And I say in part that it's poetic because it doesn't make 100%. It's not, I can't make sense of all of it. It's not like one arc that flows through all of it, and how one story connects to another or how they all work together, I'm not really sure. But I enjoyed it quite a bit. I liked the artwork. I think I paid $10 for it, and it definitely, I liked it. Another book that I picked up a couple years ago at Baltimore Comic-Con was Jonah Hex. I bought a bunch of issues of Jonah Hex. This was the 2006 series. Most of them were drawn by Jordi Bernay. And in all honesty, I had higher hopes. I had read the Solo issue. Solo was a series that DC Comics did about 10 years ago, in which they had, actually it's probably more like a dozen years ago at this point, in which DC had different artists. They gave each artist it only ran for 12 issues. They gave each artist an issue, and to fill with their artwork, I think they were like 64-page issues. And one of the issues, I didn't buy the entire series, but one of the issues that I did buy was the Jordi Bernay issue. And I really like his artwork, but I didn't feel like his artwork worked real well with these stories. And I don't think that's because he doesn't know how to draw the things that are in the story. I think he does a fine job on that. It's just that it didn't seem like, I don't know, I kind of got the impression that whatever instructions he was getting from the writers weren't translating well to him. He's, I believe, Spanish, and I don't know if he didn't understand what they were doing, or there just was a lack of communication between the writers and the artists. Maybe it was the fact that the writers were just sending him the stories, and he would draw them, and there wasn't much back and forth or much collaboration between the two to get the story to come out the way they wanted it to. But for the most part, I found the stories to be a little bit choppy, I think, and I really wasn't blown away. And I read, and he was not the regular artist on the book. There was really, as I understand it, no regular artist on the book. They would get different artists to draw stories, and it just didn't work for me. His artwork with their words, and there was something missing there, and I had high hopes for it, based on that issue of Solo that I read several years ago and still have. The one issue that I did buy that was not drawn by Jordi Bernay that I really did enjoy was issue 33, which is called The Hunting Trip, which was drawn by Darwin Cook. And that was a much better story. And I don't know if it was the story was better or it was just that the collaboration was better. And I don't know if there's any way I can find out something like that. But it just felt much better. it just felt like something about that issue worked for me. The others did not work as well. They would work in little places, but as a whole, I don't know. It didn't work real well, the Jordi Bernay drawn stories. And the final book I want to talk about is Fantastic Four Books of Doom by Ed Brubaker and Pablo Raimondi. I had heard a lot of praise for this, especially from the guys on Comic Geek Speak. I bought it through Comixology. It's a good story. It's basically an origin story of Doctor Doom. It's a decent story. I didn't love it though. I didn't think it was great. The artwork is nice. The story is good. It's just, I don't know, it just doesn't... I guess one problem I have sometimes with origin stories, especially ones that are stretched over 6 issues like this one is that where is the story going? You know, what's really happening in the story? What kind of development is there? What, you know, am I just going to get something that I've already read before in a different form? And I don't know. I didn't feel like I got anything new out of it. I didn't feel like it was told in a particularly special way. And, I mean, it was interesting. It was decent, but it just didn't blow my socks off. And I guess in some ways I felt like that was what I had been led to believe might happen. And when it didn't, I was a little disappointed. In preparing to record this episode, I've been doing a lot of thinking about the past year and about moving forward with this podcast, what I want it to be and how I do it and the processes I go through, because it's much more than just reading and watching and recording. And there's a lot more to the website also that I try to put together. And this is definitely not a show like a lot of podcasts that is... I don't think of it as a show for the particular week that it gets released. I think of it as something that I want to be there on the bookshelf, on the internet, that can be picked up and listened to at any time in the future. I don't want it to be necessarily connected to any point in time. In some ways it's going to be connected to some point in time, because after all, I'm going to go on, I'm going to read other things, I'm going to watch other things, and it's going to expand my knowledge base, my interests. I might lose interest in things. So in that sense, it's a living thing, but in other senses, I want it to be a snapshot of what I thought at a particular time. Let's see, first the process. The way I do it is first I read or I watch something, and then I make notes. And my note-taking has changed a little bit recently. I used to just make notes right before I would record. Now I'm starting to make notes as soon as I'm done reading. Well, not necessarily as soon as I'm done reading, but soon after I'm done reading or soon after I watch something that I think I might want to record about, I will sit down and write some notes. And it won't necessarily be anything long. It might be a half a page or something like that. And I have notebooks for this. And so I have one notebook where I write down my notes, not when I'm getting ready to record an episode, but once I've done my reading or my watching. And then I have another notebook where I make my notes for the show that I'm going to record based on. Now, sometimes those notes are almost identical. Sometimes I'll just take certain things out. Sometimes I'll add things. Now, in between the two note-taking process, I will also do research sometimes. I'll spend time, for instance, especially for comic book shows, I will sometimes spend time on Comic Book DB or the Grand Comics database or Wikipedia, looking things up, trying to figure out, okay, what's this guy's real name? What's her origin? Where did she first appear? That kind of stuff. And then I will sometimes include notes sections. If you've been listening to this show for any length of time, you might have noticed that I will include sections where I will just talk about background information on characters, on situations, or on comic books in general, or sometimes even on writers or artists. Once I've got my notes together, then I will record, and I found that sometimes I will get too inside my own head when it comes to recording, and I have to just let it flow out. And honestly, sometimes it takes more than one try to get that done, because sometimes I'll realize that I'm just sitting there and I'm just reading my notes, and what you're getting is just, it's not necessarily very monotone, but it's not very interesting, it's not very organized, it quite often doesn't sound very passionate. And passion, I think, is a big part of it, and it's part of what I found that gets me interested quite often in a podcast, is how interested are the people who are talking on the show about what they're talking about. How much does it sound like they really want to be there? And I think this is in true particular about amateur podcasts like this one, where sometimes people get a little too, I don't want to use the term nerdy, because nerdy can mean a lot of different things and have all sorts of different implications, but I think sometimes people get a little too regimented and a little too by the numbers with their recordings. And what you end up getting is something kind of cold, and something which doesn't, which just leaves me, uninterested, and quite often I don't listen to those podcasts very much. But usually I'll encounter those podcasts, I'll try those podcasts, and then I won't listen to them again, unless they're talking on something that I really like, and maybe there's something about what they're saying. But anyway, so I try to avoid that. I don't want to do that. And like I said, it's not always easy, because sometimes it's hard to find the thread that I need, where to begin when I'm talking about a comic book or a TV show. What should I lead with? How should I open up? And sometimes, and I find this with my writing as well, is that when I write things out, usually it's the last thing I write is what I should start with. And so that's one reason why I think it's good to do two sets of notes, because in the first set of notes, I'm kind of writing things out, and then as I write things out, I will get an idea. This is the essence of what I've been writing down. This is what really interests me about this book or about this cartoon. And so that's where I should begin. And so that's what might be the first thing that I put down in my show notes, not my show notes, but in the notes that I'm going to read from when I'm recording, and that I will refer to when I'm recording. And then, of course, there's the post-production process, or assembling the episode, which is where because I quite often have more than one recording that makes up an episode, including this one. And what I'll end up doing is I have to put them together. I have to put the bumper sounds in there, the drum beats or whatever it is that I'm using. I have to put the opening and the closing music in there. I have to record a little bit where I say Dave Talks Comics, episode 102 or 103 or whatever the case might be. And the closing, and I suppose I could use a standard opening, a standard closing. I could record it once and use that, but I prefer to re-record it every time. And I don't know if it's really necessary, but that's the way I choose to do it. So that's the process. Now the website. Now I've made some changes to the look of things a little bit on the website. The front page certainly has changed. I got rid of some of the extra stuff that was there. Actually, I moved it kind of so it's on the side. One of the things that I've added over the course of this year is I've added a page at Dave Talks Comics for panels that I've recorded. I have quite a few up there, maybe a dozen and a half or something like that at this point. I've added all the episodes that I recorded at Baltimore Comic Con this year, at Heroes Con both this year and last year, at at Appleseed Con this year, at the Small Press Expo this year, and I've got other recordings from prior years that I'm planning to upload. So if you look on the right-hand side, there's now a list that says conventions, and at the bottom of that, there's a list of the conventions that I've been to and talked about: Heroes Con, Appleseed, Baltimore Comic Con, the Small Press Expo, and the anime convention in Baltimore, whose name is I'm completely blanking on. I should probably just look at my screen and scroll up and look at the. Let's see, what is it called? It is called Otakon. Although actually I didn't list that there now that I look at it. Yeah, I didn't list that there. But so these are the conventions that I've been to. But anyway, at the bottom of that list, it says convention panels, and if you click on that, it'll take you to the page that has all the recordings that I have done of convention panels using my iPhone, and and so they're all listed there, grouped by the show that they were done at, and you can download them or you can play them right there. There's no images to go along with them, just short descriptions of who was on the panel and what was discussed. I've started moving. Another thing that I've done, this is kind of more of a background thing, you probably wouldn't notice it, is I've started moving a lot of the images to Flickr. I was using Imgur, or I'm not even sure if that's how it's pronounced, Imgur, but I found their website to be inconsistent. I think they have problems with people, with too many users, and so sometimes things aren't available, and sometimes I couldn't log in, I couldn't get to my pictures, and so I just gave up, and I went back to using, I went to Flickr. I already had a Flickr account, pro account, and so I just set up a collection or an album there for all these images that I'm using on at Dave Talks Comics, and they're linked there. Now, one thing I noticed that right about the time that I started doing that, right about the time I started doing that, which was around August, September, is I've noticed an increase in the number of downloads I'm getting. I don't get a huge number of downloads, but it definitely increased in a significant way. It's like I said, it's still not a huge number of downloads, but I mean, it went up by something like maybe 30 or 40%. So that was interesting, and that's the only thing I can think of to attribute it to. I don't get any feedback really, or very rarely do I get feedback from people. So obviously I know people are downloading it. I don't know exactly how many people are listening to the show, but the numbers are certainly up in the last 4 months of 2015. I mean, obviously, I want to finish up this run about the Legion of Superheroes, the Great Darkness Saga. And let me see, looking at my list, there's some Silver Age, Bronze Age Marvel stuff that I want to talk about. I already did an episode on Iron Man, which was from the end of the Silver Age, or right near the end of the Silver Age. I want to do some more episodes on Iron Man that'll probably be crossing over into the Bronze Age. I want to do some. I've got an idea for an episode on Nick Fury, which will be a combination of Sergeant Fury and Colonel Nick Fury of S.H.I.E.L.D. I want to do some episodes. I want to read some Captain America comic books from back then and do some episodes on those. There's some stuff that I've read that I would like to record on. I did episodes in actually, one was in 2013 and one was in 2014 on Hard Time. Or no, wait, one was in 2014, one was in 2015, on Hard Time. And I covered all of the original series, which was 12 issues, but I've since read Hard Time Season 2, and I'd like to do an episode on that. I talked about doing an episode about reading more of the Doom Patrol, the Silver Age Doom Patrol. I have the first 3 archives. I did an episode on the 3rd volume in 2014. I never got around to picking up the 4th volume, but I would like to get my hands on that and do an episode on that, maybe 2, I don't know. And I'd also like to do another episode on Superman Adventures. I already have something recorded on one story, but it's not enough to make a full episode, and I would rather do a full episode just on Superman Adventures rather than bundle it with something else. And there's plenty of stories that look interesting, and they're relatively cheap on Comixology. I can get them for 99 cents a piece. So, Samurai Jack. I'm almost certain I'm going to do an episode on Samurai Jack. I'm almost certain that's going to come up very soon. And maybe I'll do more if I continue to watch beyond Season 1. I definitely want to do an episode on JLU Season 3. And there's some other things that I'd like to get back to All-Star Squadron. I've thought about maybe reading the Steel series, Commander Steel, whose series was from, I think, 1978. I believe it was one of those that died when the DC, the comic book died, not the character, when the DC implosion happened, which I believe was in 1978. And then he became a character in All-Star Squadron, so I was thinking I'd go back and read that series and also do a series on, and also read some of the comic books from right about the time that he got introduced into All-Star Squadron. And I'd like to get back to Scalped. I would like to finish off Scalped. That, I think, would be a good idea. So these are all things. These are all books that I want to read, and some cartoons. I mentioned some cartoons that I want to watch. And I don't know. I think I can be more strategic about this. I think I can plan this out a little more. I think that reality is that I can't talk about everything that I read. I'm reading a lot more than what I have time to devote episodes to. But I could always just keep notes and maybe do something like I did this year, where I did a quick rundown of some books that I thought were worth mentioning at the end of the year. So that's a possibility for 2016. Some trends, some things that I've noticed about my comic book reading, my comic book buying. I've been certainly reading more digitally in 2016. I bought a tablet a few years ago, but I wasn't really using it for comic book reading until this year. I'm not sure if there's anything that I read that I talked about on the show prior to this year that I read only on the tablet, whether it was through Comixology or Marvel Unlimited, which I recently subscribed to. I've also noticed that I have been buying less. I certainly have been buying stuff at conventions. That I don't think I've really cut back that much, although I don't buy anywhere near as much as some people do. You know, and I might come home with 20, 30 comics, but I've heard stories of people going out and buying, like long box, coming back with long boxes full of comics, and that's definitely not me. So I've definitely been buying less, and I've been focusing more on my backlog, because I definitely do have a backlog of comic books. There's right now I'm reading some comic books that I bought, I think some of them a year or two ago, and I have plenty of stuff digitally. Nowhere near as much of a digital backlog as I do of a paper backlog, but I certainly have plenty of stuff to read. And the other thing that I've noticed, or the other thing that's definitely become a part of my podcasting process, is that I've been definitely taking more notes. I actually run 2 notebooks now as opposed to 1. So the first notebook so I have a notebook that's specifically just for taking notes as I read. And then I have another notebook where I compile the notes. So it's kind of like the first draft of my notes. And then I have another notebook where I compile the notes and I write out what I want to talk about. And that's what I read from when I am recording an episode like this, or any episode. So I'm looking forward to 2016. I'm definitely still interested in podcasting. It is not a chore. The only chore is really finding the time to do this, finding the time to read. Actually, not reading isn't that hard to find time to do or to watch, because I don't binge watch, so I don't have to plan out huge blocks of time. I do it here, I do it there. It's doing the research takes time, though. Spending time on the Grand Comics database or on Comic Book DB, that it can take time, and sometimes I spend too much time doing the research. I get interested in one thing and I find a reference to something else, and then I'm off on a tangent, going off in a completely other direction, and it takes me time to get back to where I was originally going, and I get ideas of things that I want to buy, and then I don't buy them, but then I've spent all this stuff. So it's fun. I really enjoy it, but sometimes it's kind of tough to find the time to do all this and to put it all together. But I'm hoping that I can do at least as many episodes as I did this year, and hopefully a few more. And I'm looking forward to hitting the conventions again this year. Appleseed won't be happening, but the other 3 that I went to last year will, so I'll probably be hitting all of them. And I'm really looking forward to 2016, and I hope it's going to be a great year for everybody, and for this podcast, and for comic books in general. A few more thoughts I have before wrapping this up. One is, I'm a strong believer that less is more, and I had to laugh when I thought of that, because at the time I was thinking about the fact that I'm kind of frustrated with the fact that I can't cover everything that I want to talk about. I can't seem to cover everything that I read or watch. And then I thought, well, less is more, right? And that so I should be happy that I can't cover everything, right? I don't know. So it's kind of weird, but maybe I should be. I don't know. It just made me laugh, and I thought it was worth mentioning. Another thing is that I seem to have come across a new way to cover these shows, to cover comic books and cartoons. And I think in the past I felt like if I was going to cover something, then I had to talk about every single issue. I had to talk about every single episode, and I had to give them all equal treatment. And I've certainly moved away from giving them all equal treatment, but I think the next step is to get to the point where I only spotlight certain episodes and certain issues of comic books. And I think this is especially true with cartoons, but I think it could also be true with comic books. And then finally, I wanted to say that I listen to a lot of other podcasts, and I've noticed that a number of them are doing the same thing as me, i.e. that they are doing a look back at 2015 for their show. And one thing that I've noticed, not all of them are doing, but at least a couple of them have done, is a clip show type approach. And the podcasts in particular that I'm thinking of are WTF, Mark Maron's podcast, and Word Balloon. And so that got me thinking about whether I could do something like that for Dave Talks Comics. I think it's a little late at this point to do it for 2015, but it's something that I might do. I'm thinking about doing for 2016. That's it for episode 103. Dave Talks Comics can be found on the internet at davetalkscomics.com and facebook.com/DaveTalksComics. On Twitter at DaveTalksComics. You can email the show at davetalkscomics@gmail.com. Next time, I will be talking about Season 1 of Samurai Jack. I'm Dave. Thank you for listening.